The night was silent except for the restless whisper of the wind. As Ethan walked through his late father's dimly lit study, the old scent of paper and dust pressing against his senses, his heart pounded as he reached the oak desk where a weathered envelope sat untouched for years. He hesitated, his fingers trembling, before tearing it open, revealing a letter in his father's handwriting. Ethan whispered, "Why now? Why after all these years?" The words unraveled a truth he never imagined. His father had not abandoned him, but had been shielding him from a secret that could have shattered his childhood. The revelation struck like thunder, leaving him gasping for breath, as though the weight of decades of silence had just collapsed upon his chest. Ethan sat motionless in the chair, his mind racing through years of unanswered questions, every memory of his father now colored by the words on the fragile paper. He whispered, "You weren't gone. You were protecting me," his voice breaking as the truth felt heavier than the lies he once believed. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer, as though the silence itself judged him for never seeking answers sooner. A storm of grief and anger welled inside him, mixing with a strange relief that the man he thought had abandoned him had actually loved him enough to carry a painful secret. He folded the letter carefully, hands still trembling, as though even the paper could shatter if touched too firmly, and placed it back on the desk. His chest rose and fell unevenly, torn between rage and gratitude, his mind unable to settle on which emotion would claim him first. The stillness of the study was broken only by Ethan's shallow breathing as he leaned forward, his elbows pressed into the desk, his face buried in his hands. He muttered, "Why didn't you trust me with this?" as if the ghost of his father could hear the torment in his words. The air felt thick, the old books looming above him like silent witnesses to his unraveling. His pulse quickened, and every second stretched longer, as though time had turned cruel in the face of his discovery. He lifted his head slowly, eyes red, and stared at the shelves that once fascinated him as a boy, realizing how many secrets had been hidden behind those walls. A wave of betrayal burned through him, mingling with a desperate yearning for the man he had lost, a longing that now ached sharper because of the truth. Ethan stood suddenly, the chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor, the sound echoing like a shout in the silence. His chest heaved as he began pacing the room, fists clenching and unclenching, as though the anger inside him demanded to be released. He whispered bitterly, "You left me to hate you," his voice raw, cracking in the empty air. The storm outside pressed against the window, raindrops streaking the glass, matching the storm unraveling in his chest. Each step carried the weight of years, every corner of the study now a reminder of the silence his father had left him with. His eyes caught the reflection of himself in the glass cabinet, pale and strained, and for a fleeting moment he didn't recognize the man staring back at him. His steps slowed as exhaustion crept in, the weight of his emotions leaving his body heavy, shoulders slumped as though carrying the years of silence on his back. Ethan stopped by the window, staring at the rain sliding down the glass, each drop blurring the world outside, as if even nature mirrored his confusion. He whispered, "What am I supposed to do with this now?" the words trembling out of him like a child lost in the dark. The truth had shattered the narrative he lived with for so long, leaving him suspended between anger and longing, unable to decide which path to follow. His hands pressed flat against the cool glass, the cold seeping into his skin, grounding him while his heart threatened to tear itself apart. In that moment, he knew his life could no longer remain the same. Dawn thinned the shadows in the study, while Ethan traced the letter's creases, mapping old hurts across new meaning. He counted the nights he'd worn anger like armor, and felt the weight of it dent his ribs. Ethan said, "If love was protection, why did it leave me alone in the dark?" The desk smelled of varnish and dust, like time preserved under glass. He remembered birthdays staged like ceasefires, gifts handed over like truce flags. Ethan said, "I kept score so hard I missed the game." The words on the page softened, not in excuse, but in context that refused to be simple. He slid the letter back into its envelope, a fragile truth he would carry until it became part of his stride. The diner welcomed him with clatter and warmth, a place where grief could hide behind coffee steam. Liam slid into the booth and studied Ethan's eyes like a medic checking a pulse. Ethan said, "He didn't leave me, he shielded me, and it burns anyway." Liam's mouth tilted into empathy that refused pity. Liam said, "Two things can be true, and pain isn't great at math." Plates sang on chrome, and a jukebox stitched old chords into the air. Ethan said, "I built a life on being right about him." Liam said, "Now try being kind to the kid who needed that story." The coffee cooled, but something inside Ethan began to thaw. Back home, Ethan opened the cedar trunk where memory kept its breath shallow. He lifted a paper airplane inked with a crooked signature that once felt like a dare. Ethan said, "I trained myself to hear silence as judgment." The house answered with a soft tick, like time rehearsing a gentler tempo. He pictured a hallway where he'd practiced indifference until it looked like courage. Ethan said, "Some lessons arrive late, but they still arrive." The air turned brighter around the edges of the ache. Not miracle, just margin. He set the airplane on the desk, a relic promoted to witness. Ethan met Grace at the community garden, where grief learned to share space with growth. She handed him gloves, and the quiet of someone who had carried worse, and kept walking. Grace said, "The ground takes what you give it, then returns it changed." He pressed seedlings into cool soil, surprised by how hope preferred small containers. Ethan said, "I don't know how to forgive a man who thought distance was care." Grace said, "Start with forgiving the boy who believed it." Wind moved through stakes and twine like a gentle instruction. He felt the earth hold steady beneath his hands, a lesson in wait and yield. Night returned without menace, and Ethan opened a blank notebook as if cracking a window. He listed the stories he had sworn were facts, and found the gaps where fear had edited. Ethan said, "I can hold my hurt without letting it drive." The study no longer felt like a shrine, it felt like a workshop. He wrote a letter he did not need to send, only to name the truths without drawing blood. Ethan said, "I will learn to let go, not to forget, but to make room." The page filled with ordinary courage, a language he could finally speak. The weight of truth became sharper in the days that followed, each morning bringing Ethan closer to anger than to peace. As he walked along the quiet street, memories of his father's silence clashed against the letter's confession. He muttered, "You thought I was too fragile, but you left me brittle." The words hung in the cold air like frost. Liam joined him, sensing the storm inside. Ethan said, "Every part of me wants to forgive him, but every scar fights back." Liam replied, "Scars remind us where we broke, but also where we healed." Ethan stopped walking, his jaw tightening, voice strained as he whispered, "Then why do mine still ache like open wounds?" The question pierced the silence, leaving only the echo of footsteps on wet pavement. Inside his apartment, the silence turned unbearable, every object carrying the weight of questions he couldn't silence. Ethan slammed the letter onto the table, whispering, "I hate that I finally have proof he cared, and it doesn't feel enough." His voice cracked, a raw mix of grief and defiance. He paced the room, chest heaving, words spilling out as if they had been caged for years. Ethan said, "He thought distance was strength. Do you know what that did to me?" His reflection in the darkened window stared back, unsympathetic. He whispered, "It made me doubt love itself." The air thickened, carrying his confession like smoke that refused to dissipate. The next day, Ethan sought out Grace, hands shoved deep in his pockets, eyes stormy. She watched him approach with patience, carved from years of loss. Ethan said, "How do you forgive someone who never asked for it?" His words cracked like brittle wood. Grace knelt in the garden, smoothing soil between her fingers. She replied softly, "You don't forgive for them. You forgive for you." Ethan dropped his gaze, voice sharp. "But he robbed me of years I can't reclaim." Grace looked at him, eyes steady. "So don't lose more years to anger." His breath stilled, the truth both infuriating and undeniable. That night, sleep evaded him. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, shadows pressing against the walls. He whispered into the darkness, "You made me strong, but you made me hollow too." His voice trembled like a confession to an unseen jury. The letter lay open beside him, words glowing faintly in the lamp's halo. He pressed his palms to his eyes, whispering, "I don't know if I miss you or the idea of you I made up." The admission burned as it left his lips, tearing through years of denial. His chest rose sharply, as if bracing for a reply that would never come. By the weekend, Ethan sat across from Liam again, their table littered with coffee stains and half-eaten pastries. Liam studied him, waiting for words. Ethan finally said, "I can't tell if I'm breaking apart or piecing myself together." His voice was hoarse, raw. Liam leaned in, replying, "Both are possible. Sometimes breaking is the start of building." Ethan gripped the cup tightly, eyes wet. "But what if I don't like who I become?" Liam's voice softened, "Then keep shaping until you do. The pain is clay, it bends if you work it." Ethan stared at him, his breathing shaky, torn between resistance and the quiet comfort of being understood. The library was nearly empty, quiet enough for whispers to echo like confessions. Ethan sat across from Grace, the letter folded neatly beside him. He whispered, "He wasn't who I thought. He carried pain I never knew." Grace tilted her head, listening. "Secrets don't erase love, Ethan. They just change its shape." He clenched his fists on the table, voice trembling. "But how do I live with the truth that my hate was misplaced?" Grace placed her hand gently over his. "By letting the truth do what lies never could, free you." Ethan's chest tightened, the room spinning as her words settled deep, reshaping his grief into something unfamiliar but alive. Later that evening, Ethan rummaged through the study, driven by an urgency he couldn't name. Behind old books he uncovered a hidden journal, his father's handwriting filling page after page. His breath caught as he whispered, "You were writing to me all along." His hands shook as he flipped through the entries. He read aloud, "My son deserves to know the truth, but I fear it will break him." Ethan pressed the journal to his chest, voice breaking. "I was broken already. All I needed was you." The realization pierced him, both wound and balm, a truth that rewrote years of anger in a single breath. Ethan met Liam under the flicker of street lamps, journal clutched like a lifeline. His voice spilled fast, shaky. He wrote everything down, Liam. His fear, his love, his guilt. He wasn't the coward I believe. Liam leaned against the railing, listening. "So maybe you're not a victim anymore. Maybe you're a son reclaiming his father." Ethan's breath trembled, eyes burning. "But if I forgive him, who do I blame for the years I wasted?" Liam stepped closer, voice steady. "Maybe it's not about blame anymore. It's about what you choose to carry now." The words cut sharp like a blade, carving away his defenses. Sleep offered no peace that night. Ethan dreamed of his father standing in the doorway, silent but steady, eyes shadowed with regret. Ethan whispered, "Why didn't you trust me?" His father's image replied softly, "Because I didn't trust myself." The words pierced like glass. Ethan said, "I hated you for leaving me." The vision answered, "And I hated myself for staying silent." The dream dissolved as Ethan reached out, desperate to hold on. He awoke gasping, tears wet on his cheeks, clutching the journal as though it might vanish too. For the first time, his anger cracked open into fragile compassion. Morning came with pale light streaming across the study. Ethan set the journal and letter side by side, the weight of two truths staring back at him. He whispered, "You were flawed, but you loved me the only way you knew." His voice cracked, softer this time, more accepting than condemning. Liam entered quietly, standing in the doorway, watching. Ethan looked up, eyes swollen but clearer. "I thought I was carrying his absence, but I've been carrying his love all along." Liam nodded slowly, voice low. "Then maybe it's time to carry yourself." Ethan breathed deeply, the air heavy but less suffocating, as though a door had finally opened inside him. The storm outside raged as Ethan stood in the study, the letter and journal spread before him like evidence in a trial. His hands slammed the desk, voice breaking. You loved me, but you abandoned me too. Which truth am I supposed to live with? His chest heaved, eyes burning with tears that refused to fall. The shadows pressed closer, as if demanding his verdict. Liam's voice, calm but urgent, cut through. You don't have to choose one truth over the other. Both are real, Ethan. Ethan spun toward him, trembling. Then what do I do with all this anger? His voice cracked into a whisper. It's all I've ever known. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer to himself. Ethan paced furiously, lightning flashing across his face. He made me carry a lie my whole life. I built myself on hatred, Liam, and now that foundation is crumbling. His voice was sharp, like glass splintering in the dark. Liam stepped forward. Then build something new. Anger doesn't have to be your cornerstone anymore. Ethan stopped, his hands shaking. And what if without it I collapse? What if there's nothing left of me? Liam's tone softened, but his words were firm. Then maybe it's time to discover who you are without rage. Ethan's lip quivered, his silence louder than his screams. Ethan collapsed into the chair, his hands gripping the journal tightly, voice hoarse. He thought silence was love, but silence was a wound that never closed. Tears finally slid down his cheeks, unrestrained. I hated him so fiercely, and now I see the love buried in his fear. How do I forgive him without betraying myself? Liam crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Forgiveness isn't betrayal, it's release. You're not excusing his choices, you're freeing yourself. Ethan shook his head violently. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Liam met his eyes steadily. Strength is already in you, you just have to let go. The thunder roared as Ethan stood once more, voice raised as if shouting into the storm itself. I forgive you, Father, but I will never understand you. His cry shattered years of silence, his chest convulsing with sobs that finally broke free. He pressed the journal to his heart, eyes shut tight. You should have trusted me, but I'm done being a prisoner to your fear. His words rang out like a vow, sharp and unyielding. Liam stood behind him, tears in his own eyes, whispering, That's not weakness, Ethan. That's courage. Ethan turned, exhausted but lighter, as though he had wrestled with a ghost and survived. The storm eased into rain, gentle taps against the glass like applause after a symphony. Ethan collapsed into the chair once more, breath ragged but steady. It feels like I've been carrying chains I never saw until now, he whispered. Liam placed the letter back on the desk beside him, voice soft. And tonight, you broke them. Ethan lifted his eyes, red but calmer, whispering, Then maybe I can learn to love without fear. Liam nodded, smile faint. And maybe you'll learn to love yourself first. For the first time in years, Ethan exhaled without pain, the silence finally feeling like peace. Morning light spilled into the study, soft and golden, brushing away the storm's shadow. Ethan sat at the desk, the journal open, his fingers tracing the ink like a map of wounds and survival. He whispered, I thought your silence was abandonment, but it was fear. And fear is human. The admission sat heavy, but no longer unbearable. Liam entered quietly, leaning on the doorway. Ethan said, I can't erase the pain, but I can stop letting it be the only story. Liam nodded, his voice gentle. That's not forgetting him. That's finally remembering yourself. Ethan closed the journal softly, eyes calmer, a fragile peace settling into his chest. Later that day, Ethan visited Grace in the garden, carrying the journal under his arm. She looked up from the soil, eyes knowing. He said, I read his words, Grace. He was terrified of breaking me. Grace brushed dirt from her gloves. Parents think they shield us by hiding their wounds, but that only passes the weight forward. Ethan's throat tightened. I wanted to hate him forever. It was easier than feeling this. Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. Hatred is heavy armor, Ethan. It keeps out pain, but it also keeps out healing. He exhaled shakily, realizing the armor was slipping away. That evening, Ethan sat with Liam at the cafe, the journal resting on the table between them. he said quietly. I always thought I was too broken to be worthy of love. But reading his words, he was just as broken, and he loved me anyway. Liam studied him, then leaned forward. So maybe being broken doesn't make us unworthy. It just makes us human. Ethan's eyes filled again, but softer this time. If that's true, then maybe I can love myself even in pieces. Liam smiled faintly. Not maybe, Ethan. Definitely. The words landed with warmth, stitching something back together inside him. At home again, Ethan opened a fresh notebook, the blank pages waiting like an invitation. He whispered, I can't rewrite the past, but I can write what comes next. His pen hovered, then moved slowly, words forming with steady intent. You loved me imperfectly, Father, and I will learn to love myself the same way. Imperfectly, but truly. He paused, letting the words breathe, then continued writing, not for his father this time, but for himself. The silence of the room no longer mocked him. Instead, it felt like company. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone with his thoughts. Night fell quietly, the storm now only a memory, the air fresh with renewal. Ethan stood by the window, watching raindrops slide slowly down the glass. He whispered, I forgive you, Father, and I forgive me too. His voice no longer trembled, it carried a fragile strength, born from acceptance rather than defiance. Behind him, the journal lay closed, no longer a wound but a reminder of survival. Liam's voice echoed in his memory, steady and sure. Maybe it's time to carry yourself. Ethan's lips curled into the faintest smile, his reflection in the glass finally one he could recognize. The following morning, sunlight poured across the study, soft and steady, as if the house itself had exhaled. Ethan sat with Liam, the journal resting closed between them. Ethan whispered, It doesn't hurt the same way anymore. The pain is still here, but it isn't steering me. Liam leaned back, his voice calm. That's the first step of freedom, Ethan, choosing what drives you. Ethan nodded slowly, eyes on the journal. For years I was chasing answers. Now, I think I've found myself instead. Liam smiled gently. That's worth more than any letter could give. Ethan breathed deeply, as though finally aligned with the morning light. Later, Ethan returned to the garden, standing quietly as Grace tended to young plants. He said softly, I thought forgiveness was a gift for him, but it feels more like a gift for me. Grace straightened, brushing dirt from her gloves, eyes warm. That's how it works, Ethan. Forgiveness changes the one who gives it. He knelt beside her, fingers brushing the soil, his voice steady. I used to think I was broken because of him. Now I see I'm whole because I survived him. Grace smiled faintly, her voice like a benediction. And now you'll grow, just like these roots. That evening, Ethan met Liam at the cafe for one last conversation. He stirred his coffee, absent-mindedly, before speaking. I was so afraid that letting go would erase him, but it hasn't. He's still here, just not as a wound anymore. Liam leaned closer, his voice low. That's because you turned the wound into wisdom. It doesn't vanish. It changes shape. Ethan smiled faintly, eyes clear. For the first time, I think I can carry him without carrying his silence. Liam's gaze softened. And now you can carry yourself. Ethan nodded, the weight on his shoulders lighter than ever before. Back in the study that night, Ethan stood before the closed journal and letter one last time. He whispered, You're a part of me now, not my prison but my teacher. His hand rested on the journal gently, like a farewell and a promise. He turned toward the window, rainless and clear, stars breaking through the darkness. His voice steadied, quiet but resolute. I can't change what you left me, but I can choose what I carry forward. The words filled the room, no longer aching, but anchoring. For the first time, silence felt like trust instead of fear. The final morning rose quiet, sunlight spilling across Ethan's face as he stepped outside for the first time without the journal in his hands. He whispered, I let go, not to forget, but to live. His shoulders relaxed, steps slow but certain, each one lighter than the last. Liam's voice echoed in his memory, Strength is already in you, You just have to let go. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, the air cool and unburdened. When he opened them, his gaze was steady, fixed not on the past, but on the path ahead.